Since 2009, Nigeria has been facing terrorism. The Northeast has been home to one of the world's most dreaded terrorist organizations, Boko Haram. Now, various Nigerian governments have battled and failed to mitigate this problem that has led to the death of at least 30,000 people since 2009 and the displacement of more than 2 million. The terrorists have often targeted the weak and vulnerable, destroying markets and households, with the targets often being villages and rural communities. Schoolgirls have also been victims of their delivery. Now, Dapchi schoolgirls and the globally known Chibok girls' abduction are just some of the perpetration of evil done by these terrorists. In northwest Nigeria, where banditry is reigning supreme, scores of lives have been lost and houses and other properties have been left in ashes. In the last 10 months, more than 200 people have been killed in various Kaduna communities. Now, so from ethno-religious violence and bloodshed to terrorism and banditry, Nigerians don't sleep with their eyes closed. Now, joining me now from Abuja is Nigeria's security expert Kabir Adamu, and from the United Kingdom, Temitope Olodo, who is a preventive terrorism expert and author. Gentlemen, good to have you both join me this evening on this very important talk about security. Let me start with you, Temitope, if you will. Nigeria is facing a deeply rooted security crisis, and it seems the terrorists which the government claims to have defeated are reincarnated. Do you think the Nigerian government has been sincere with Nigerians on the fight against terror in its northeast?
Thank you so much for having me. I think it's a very valid question to ask, considering the amount of time that we've been told by this government and people within this government that understand the issue of security, that Boko Haram have been technically defeated. You know as well as I do, and many Nigerians do not see that. In terms of the scorecard, they seem to score the federal government quite low on this. In fact, if you're a lecturer, you'll be scoring the government F9 on this. Not that they've not answered the question, but the question is that they've not actually dealt with all the areas that will, more or less bring us to a conclusion that community confidence and reassurance that things have been done properly. That is the problem. We are fighting, we are winning, but we are going 2 steps backward every other time. And that is not good. We need to look at examples from around the world on how terrorism has been eradicated.
Before we go looking at how terrorism, let me come in here. Before we go looking at how terrorism has been, addressed in other parts of the world, I'll bring in Kabir Adamu. Kabir, you live in Abuja, and you have also seen how close they were when they came on, an attack on the city. Do you believe that this is a case of the kick? According to the general overseeing this battle, he described Boko Haram's move as the kick of a dying horse. Is that what it is at the moment?
So we would need to be mindful of the various dimensions of the conflict. Just yesterday, the president sent a delegation to Borno to sympathize with the people of Borno over the killings of the farmers that you mentioned in your intro. And interestingly, when that delegation visited the Sheikh of Borno, you have to remember that the Sheikh of Borno is the highest ranking traditional ruler in northeastern Nigeria. And as usual, they paid him homage. He interestingly commended the efforts of the Nigerian government in its counter-terrorism implementation. He referred back to 2013, 2012, 2013, 2014, when, according to him, about 7 local governments were under the control of the terrorist groups. And of course, said today, none of these local governments is under the control. He urged the federal government to enhance their effort to eradicate the groups. So in other words, the people of Borno perhaps see it a bit differently from how we're seeing it. But having said that, I would quickly like to mention, we're talking of 3 major groups. The one that we all know, which is the one headed by Shekau, otherwise called Jamaatul Ahl Sunnah Lil Dawat wal Jihad. Now that group, I will tell you, is reducing its influence, both in terms of membership and in terms of its ability to exercise control in territorial control. The other group, which is the Islamic State in West Africa province, is in a way increasing its membership because it's a bit more pliant. Now, just today, the Shekau group released a statement claiming authorship of the killing of the farmers, which is what the other terrorist groups are against, that type of heinous acts of killing for really no reason. In that statement, the Shekau faction said it killed those farmers because the village where they come from arrested one terrorist, one of their members, and that this reprisal attack is a message to them and to other villagers not to support. Now, the third group, which is the Bakura faction, which has its location around the border area between Niger and Nigeria, has remained quite stable in terms of its membership. So it's neither growing or decreasing, as it were. Now, that tells us in conclusion that when answering that question, whether the group is growing or not, we need to be mindful of some of these local dynamics. But bottom line, and this is my perspective now, as in terms of the implementation of our counter-terrorism strategy, we are yet to block the ability of the groups to recruit, the ability of the groups to get funding, and then their ability to weaponize. And as long as we don't block these 3 things, then the groups will be growing.
Let me bring in Temitope here, because quite an insightful perspective we've just gotten from Kabir, letting us in on what exactly is happening. And if the Boko Haram group has just claimed ownership of this dastardly act on the farmers, Temitope, isn't this a failure of some intelligence, knowing full well that there just might be, that's not the first time we've seen a reprisal at any time a member of the terror group is being apprehended? This community gave out one of its members to the security agencies. Shouldn't the government or the agencies have known that they will come back for such reprisals, especially on the citizens who have done that good job?
Definitely, I agree with you. I think part of the challenge we have is that in our fight against terrorism in Nigeria, we seem to be reactive rather than proactive. And I speak from a privileged position of having worked in an office for security and counterterrorism in the UK. And the UK takes its counterterrorism very seriously. And we're very proactive. Proactive means exactly what Kabir said.
How well have we seen such in the fight against the insurgents at the moment?
So currently, the Operation Lafia Dole Command is carrying out 2 operations, all of them aimed at interdiction, finding out where the terrorist groups are and then bombing them. But the success of this interdiction operations is what is questionable. Like you rightly indicated, it's since this insurgency started over a decade ago, it's very clear that any time a member of theirs is arrested or killed or whatever happens to him, they do carry out a reprisal attack in the location where that happened. So one would have expected that the kind of security arrangement in Koshobe or Mafa local government where this incident happened would have been better than what was. And so clearly there are gaps in the security arrangement that these terrorist groups are exploiting. The proactive measures have not been able to prevent this type of attacks by this group. So unfortunately, and this was restated by Mr. President, he charged the military to go after the terrorist groups. So clearly, he himself admits that more needs to be done in terms of the proactive, approach.
Well, we'll take a moment. When we come back from VSA, we'll be looking at what the government is doing at the moment, especially when it has to do with securing those who are volunteering information in the fight against terror. That's after now. Welcome back to Village Square Africa. Nigeria has for 5 years straight on been the third most terrorized nation in the world. That's according to the Global Terrorism Index. Now, according to the index, 1,245 deaths were recorded in 2019 alone. Death by Boko Haram's activities has increased by 25% over the last 1 year. So earlier in November, the terrorists downed a helicopter, killing 5 civilians in the process. Boko Haram, which started as a force against Western education, has in more than a decade grown to become one of the most dreaded terrorist organizations in the world, even causing problems in neighboring countries like Chad, Nigeria and Cameroon. And as Kabir earlier posited, it looks like Boko Haram is fizzling out, but ISWAP and the other group seem to be gaining momentum. Well, gentlemen, good to know that you guys are still there with us, looking at what exactly is happening in Nigeria, west of Africa, in the fight against terror. I come back to you, Kabir Adamu. We're looking at comments coming from the government of Nigeria. They think that the farmers should have asked or giving indication of their movement to their farmlands so that they can get adequate protection from the army within that region. How does that sit with you when you first heard that coming from the government?
Well, as a professional, I cover development Borno State, probably more than the average person does. Maybe just those that are living there would probably know these developments more than I do. So I was aware that the moment you leave 5 kilometers outside the city center, then the risk of such attacks are higher. In fact, in certain locations, you can't even venture a kilometer outside the city centers. So that means, for instance, if I was advising those farmers, I would have told them to seek additional protection when you are venturing out, especially knowing that there is already some form of presence or, as it were, awareness by the terrorist groups of the fact that one of their members had been arrested in that location. So that means they were probably around waiting for an opportunity to carry out an instance. Now, that's me as a professional speaking. But the next point, which also comes to my mind, is what kind of arrangement have the military put in place to allow villagers to seek this type of protection? But again, and this is my third point, I wouldn't want to put this responsibility entirely on the military. If you recall, not too long ago, when Governor Zulum was elected, he went out of his way to introduce state-level initiatives, including recruiting what he called paratroopers. And the primary function of those paratroopers was to protect farming communities, because he realized the military couldn't do it alone. And so to block that vulnerability, he did that. So perhaps there were other security levels or arrangements that should have provided that kind of security for the farmers, but unfortunately didn't. The House of Reps also questioned the Ministry of Interior on what it called agro rangers. And the reason why it questioned the Ministry of Interior was because those agro rangers were supposed to protect farmers in Borno State. So clearly, apart from the military, there are other security arrangements that were put in place to block the vulnerability. Because let's remember, the military cannot do this alone. Security works in concentric cycles.
Let me bring in Temitope here, because now you say the military can't do this alone, and just yesterday the governor of Borno State has asked the government to allow him get mercenaries to join in the prosecution of this. Is that the right thing to do, Temitope? Now that you were almost going to tell us how terrorism has been fought in other parts of the world, the Borno State governor wants outside help. How does this work in the fight against terror?
I think in the short run, it is a good way of trying to cut down the advancement of Boko Haram and the other operating groups in the area. And once it is done, then you need to have the containment strategy whereby you need to hold the ground. But I need to highlight also, just like my brother there, Kabir, said, that even where you inform the military were informed about the movement of the governor. But yes, Boko Haram made the attempt. So if they could make an attempt on a VIP, what would stop them from making an attempt on local farmers in the area? And we all know that most of the people that are traveling in between the towns always get escorts. Yet these Boko Haram people attack. So I don't think that will stop it. But yes, bringing in what we call private contractors to help deal with this, to sweep it up, cut these people down a bit, and then have a containment strategy to hold the ground is a good way of moving forward. So I agree with the governor.
Let me stay with you and ask this. Is just a follow-up. In what way are you looking to having mercenaries? Is it in terms of intelligence gathering or having boots on the ground to prosecute this?
For me personally, we've been quite shortcoming in terms of having appropriate boots on the ground and the intelligence. So if we could bring in technical expertise that could use the drone effectively, that could mix in the crowd, because we know that most of these people fighting with Boko Haram, there are foreign fighters there. So if they see other foreign people, there would be that surprise. But also we need special operations of people that you could drop into specific zone to go after Boko Haram leaders. That, I believe, is quite important. So on both ways, both from an intelligent perspective and having boots on the ground, I think it's essential.
So, Kabir, let's look at the effect of what this has caused or already caused in the country. At the moment, this is an attack on the nation's economy, talking about Nigeria's economy. Now, this no doubt has snowballed into food security. If you get the farmers out of the way, you get a hungry nation and invariably an angry nation. How can we get this reversed and quickly too?
In simple terms, let's revisit our national counterterrorism strategy. I am very worried, Sulaiman, that we're not talking about that document, even from the government side. That document was introduced, the revised version, in 2016, and it talks about all of these issues we're discussing. It talks about containment, it talks about elimination, it talks about revamping the local economy in those locations. And I'm very worried that we're not talking about. So let's revisit that document. Let's do an evaluation and ask critical questions. Are we implementing the recommendations of that document, or have we veered off the objectives of that document? Because frankly, that's the blueprint of our counter-terrorism strategy. And I can tell you as an outsider, I'm not in government, that we have veered off that document, there is a coordinator counter-terrorism in the Office of the National Security Advisor. I cannot remember when last I heard that coordinator say something or speak. It's made a startling revelation when he said the equipment deficit within the military has reached a stage where soldiers share ammunition among themselves, and that most of them don't even have body vest when they go out to fight. And that is the chairman of the Senate Committee on the Army. And so it's very critical. And I emphasize the word, all the security agencies, not that the military. And lastly...
okay, very quickly, let me have the last one before I move on to Temitope.
Yeah. Lastly, strategic communication, the kind of discordant messages that is coming from government officials regarding the counterterrorism implementation is not helping the matter at all. So strategic communication that would speak one language by the government, and more importantly, communicate that language to our foreign partners, I think is absolutely important.
Well, Temitope, one other aspect that resonates with many Nigerians here, even northern elders, has to do with the service chiefs, which many already. Now, speak to this. Does this make sense if we're to work with the service chiefs?
The challenge we have is that the president is insisting that he has full control of, when to hire and fire individuals. And if the president is not willing to let them go, then we have a serious challenge. I've written on this, I've written a press conference that the president should let them go. Let's bring in new people. But just like Kabir mentioned earlier, when you have a counterterrorism strategy that is good enough and you're not implementing it, then we have a problem. What we need now, and what good Nigerians need to come together and talk about now, is bring out the counterterrorism strategy, come up with an implementation plan, and based on that implementation plan, we could see where the resources are lacking, and then we could put money there, and the good people of Nigeria will support the military, the police, and other security services to ensure that we get rid of Boko Haram. It is not in the interest of any Nigerian that some Nigerians are going hungry or outside the country as a result of this. It is not good for us. So we all are coming together, north, west, and south, to ensure that Boko Haram is got rid of once and for all.
Now, so Kabir, I'll put this question to both of you. Let me start with you, Kabir. The way it is in Nigeria, by the Constitution, the governance is all about, security, protection of lives and property. And as it stands, the president is still insisting that he has faith in his service chiefs. Do you think we have a leadership crisis? Does Nigeria have a leadership crisis in the fight against terror here?
I wouldn't say so, for the simple reason that, yes, you've got symbolic positions, as it were, to occupy those leadership, positions. In the army, as an example, you've got the command and control, and then they are, as it were, effective in the discharge of their duties. When you speak to the soldiers, they will tell you, for instance, the kind of achievements that these service chiefs that we seem not to be happy with have done. Specifically, I would like to mention the Chief of Air Staff, the kind of platforms that he's been able to acquire for the Air Force. Frankly, probably in the history of the Air Force since independence, no other Chief of Air Staff has been able to do that. Perhaps since the time of Shagari, 1983. That Nigeria thought those type of acquisitions. So it's neither here nor there. Now, wouldn't it probably reach the conclusion of a leadership crisis? However, what is missing, from my understanding of the security architecture, is absence of a monitoring and evaluation process that would allow you and I, through key performance indicators, to now point a finger at any of the security agencies, including the military, and say you have failed. Why? Because when you are appointed, these were the number of incidences. Terrorism, for instance, were at 100. Now, 1 year into your tenure, we have 150 or 200. Now, until we have those type of metrics, then it will be very difficult for us to convince, as it were, Mr. President, that change this leadership.
Let me bring Temitope in. Temitope, quickly here. Same question. Do you think the country, Nigeria, has some leadership crisis in the fight against terror?
I think the best way to put it is to actually listen to what the U.S. Africa Command leader, the general, said, that Nigeria needs to lead from the front. We have the capacity to lead from the front, but at the present moment, I don't think we are really leading from the front. But more importantly, just like the president created an economic council, I think there is need to create a security council, presidential security council, where people from outside the security agency that can look in from an helicopter view can also give advice about security. It is not just for the military alone. There are people like Kabiru and other people out there in Nigeria who have the skill set that could help the president come up with even other greater ideas. The best thing, at the end of the day, if we succeed, the president takes the glory.
It's a fine place to leave it here, gentlemen. Hopefully Nigeria's security upheavals will be banished to history soon as Nigerians continue to groan in abject pain and call for an end to the wanton destruction of lives and properties. Kabir Adamu from Abuja in Nigeria and Temitope Olodo from the United Kingdom. Many thanks for being such a nice company for joining me on this program.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you, Sulaiman.
Well, don't forget you can watch us live at newscentraltv.africa. You can also go to YouTube at youtube.com/newscentraltv. Until I come your way again here on VSA, I'm Sulaiman Aledeh.